find the net earnings per paycheck. So the first thing is find the gross pay for the pay period. So that was what we did in section 9.1, based on how you're paid. And then find the adjustments to the income deductions such as retirement or insurance. Then find Social Security and Medicare tax based on gross income. Then find the federal withholding tax using the percentage method. And find any other withholding taxes such as state tax, and we're just going to worry about federal tax in this section. And find any other deductions such as insurance or union dues. You can just have all sorts of things deducted from your paycheck. And add up all those deductions and then take those away from the gross pay, or you could take the gross pay and subtract each deduction one at a time if you prefer. And the resulting amount is your take-home or your net pay. So your net pay is the amount they write your check for, and the gross pay is what you really earned. Gross pay is always more than net pay. As the textbook author says, gross pay is what you wish you had, and net pay is what you really get. So here's an example. Beth's gross weekly earnings are $588. 4% of her gross earnings is deducted for her non-exempt retirement fund, and $27.48 is deducted for insurance. So it says non-exempt, so she's going to have to pay tax on that. So find her earnings if she's married and claims 3 withholding allowances. So her retirement fund, they said, was 4%. So we take her gross earnings, 588 times 4%, and this is the amount we're going to deduct for retirement. Withholding tax from table 9.2 is $22.34. And I'll go back in a minute and show you how they got that. And Social Security would be her gross times 0.062 gives you $36.46. Medicare is 588 the gross times 0.0145, so she will have $853 deducted for Medicare. The insurance, it said, was $27.48. So if we add all of those deductions up, we get $118.33, and her net earnings would be $469.67. So let me go back and look at how they got her FIT withholding. So I don't have the table up here, but look on page 242, and again the numbers may be a little bit off because this PowerPoint used a different table, but let me go through the steps that you would use. She's weekly earnings, so on page 242, table 1, you're going to find out that for weekly earnings the withholding allowance is $70.19. And I apologize, but when I write at the top of the screen, the writing is squiggly, and I don't know why. Anywhere else on the screen, it doesn't do that. So per one withholding allowance for weekly earning is $70.19, and she has 3 withholding allowances. So we will multiply this number by 3, and I believe that gives you $210.47. Then you'll take 588 minus 210.47, and whatever that amount is, you look that up in table 2 and follow. You'll go to, she's married, so find the weekly withholding part. It's at the top of that table 2. Use the right side because she's married, and find where this number that you get when you do this subtraction fits in the table, and that's how they calculated that. And again, if you're using the table on page 242, it will come out a little bit different because this PowerPoint uses a different table, and they change every year because the tax rates don't stay the same usually. Find the employer's total deposit for withholding tax, Social Security tax, and Medicare tax. As I mentioned before, the Social Security and Medicare are matched by the employer, so you'll double whatever was withheld from employees' paychecks, and that has to be sent to the government quarterly. Then you'll add the Social Security, Medicare, and withholding tax for the total amount. And the withholding tax, they're not going to double because that's your income tax, so they're not liable for any piece of that. So here's an example payroll register where we've got these 4 employees over here, and the gross earnings are in this first column, and the amount of tax withholding, so this is federal income tax withholding, was FIT there. And that's money that you earned that they're taking out for you, paying towards your federal income tax. So they simply send that amount in. $751.03 is what you get if you add up all of these. So they will send that to the IRS, and the IRS will hang on to it. Well, they spend it, I'm sure, before April the 15th. But then you'll file your taxes and see if they paid too much, they send it back, and if they didn't withhold enough, then you have to pay some more. Then this is the Social Security that got withheld from everybody's paychecks, so you're going to add all that up. But remember, we're going to have to double that amount. But this is the amount they actually withheld from people's paychecks, and add up all the Medicare, that's the amount they actually withheld from people's paychecks. But when you decide what they have to send in each quarter, you're going to have to double this one and double this one, and that'll give you the total. So over here on the next part, the 447.58 was what they got for Social Security that they held from people's paychecks. They have to double it, they have to match it. So the total Social Security they're going to have to send in that quarter is $895.16. For Medicare, they took this amount out of people's paychecks, but they have to match it, and so what they actually send in is $209.36. Withholding, they withheld $751.03. They are not going to match that. The employer does not have to pay anything toward that. That came out of the money you earned, your income tax. But they do have to send it into the government. So what they actually have to send in this example, was $1,855.55. Now the last thing is unemployment tax. This is not withheld from your paycheck, so it does not affect the employer's paycheck. But if you are an employer, then you have to withhold this for each employee, and they're paid quarterly, and it's paid entirely by the employer. And the rates, again, are set by the federal and state government. Currently, the federal unemployment tax is 6.2% of the first $7,000 earned by an employee in a year. So they only have to pay 6.2% of 7,000 on each employee, and if you never get up to 7,000, then they only pay what you get up to. But anything over 7,000, then they don't pay anymore. And if you live in a state that has state unemployment, and most of them do, but not all of them, then if they collect for state unemployment, they get a credit up to 5.4% for the federal. So if they're paying 5.4% to the state, they're only going to be paying 0.8% for federal. And you'll see how this works in the example. So the amount a company pays in state withholding tax often depends on a company's unemployment history. This isn't true in every state. Sometimes if you're in a very stable company where you have very few people who become unemployed, you don't lay off a lot of people, then they may make you pay a smaller unemployment tax. But again, that's set by the state, and they're not all the same. There's probably 50 different plans. But if an employer pays 5.4%, like I said before, then the company will pay 0.8% in federal if they're paying 5.4% in state. For the federal government, if the amount you owe in a given quarter is less than $500, then you don't pay that quarter, you just add it to the following quarter, and until you get up to a $500 payment, or until you've paid all that you owe for that particular year. Because remember, you're only paying the unemployment on the first 7,000, and if you're only paying 0.8%, it may if you have a real small company, it may take you a while to get up to 500, but at the end of the year, you're definitely going to have to send it in because they do this each year. So here's an example. George earns $40,000 a year. If the SUTA rate is 5.4%, calculate the amount of SUTA that George's employer will pay on his behalf the first quarter. If he earns $40,000 a year and there are 4 quarters in a year, then we can assume that he earned $10,000 a quarter. Well, they only have to pay on the first 7,000, so he's going to meet that $7,000 benchmark the first quarter. So his employer will have to pay 7,000 times 0.054 to the state, and 7,000 times 0.008 for federal unemployment. And then after that, they won't have to pay any more on George because he's already maxed out. He's already earned his $7,000 in the first quarter, so they're done paying on him after the first quarter. And then, of course, next year it starts over again.